everyone. Uh, Thank you for joining us today for the Application Packaging Experts Roundtable. Uh, Before we get into the topic, quick housekeeping. All the lines will be muted. However, there is a Q&A section where you could always post your questions. And as always, in case we can't get to any of those questions during this discussion, we'll answer those questions in our community. And this discussion, this roundtable will be recorded and will be made available later on the registration page, where you could also find the history of all the previous roundtables. All right, so let me welcome today's speakers. I'm Kiran Manki. I'm the Senior Product Manager for Admin Studio and other security solutions at Flexera. Mike?
Yeah, Mike O'Connor, as it says there, Senior Solution Engineer, covering Admin Studio and other solutions that we offer at Flexera.
Jeroen?
Hi, Jeroen Braak, expert on software packaging for a very long time, but recently, the last 5 years, focusing on security, which is, of course, for many packaging people, the reason why we package in the first place.
Excellent. Sunny?
Hi, everyone. I'm one of the account managers for Admin Studio here in North America. Excited to be here. I recognize a lot of the names in the attendee list, so thank you for joining.
All right, so as always, we bring a topic to the table around the application packaging space, and we discuss the topics, we discuss challenges, problems, and of course, we also have Q&A with you guys to get your thoughts. And we thought it would be interesting to talk about automation in today's roundtable. In application packaging space, it sometimes becomes a little challenging to really understand where do we fit automation, right? So now before we directly jump into, hey, how do we automate the application packaging process? I think what's important is trying to understand various aspects of application packaging, right? So it would, like you see the graphic, right? That is generally the process that we see our customers following, or generally any packaging team or packaging factory following. You get or you start with understanding what packages you want to create the deployments for. There could be various sources. One source, of course, could be getting some requests from your application owners, or requests coming either directly from the end users, or it could be also a request which could be triggered because of some vulnerabilities or some security aspect also. So once you identify, I think you get into the further process of gathering the data, what is required to get the package ready, and then trying to figure out what is the right format for this package to be deployed. Again, there are various parameters there. Is there a standard package format that you want to follow in your organization, or are you following already today? Do you want to align with the format, or what are your deployment requirements? So based on all those criteria, you take a decision what is the right package format for the deployment, and then later hand it off to a deployment system, right? Like deployment system or endpoint management system like Configuration Manager or Intune or Workspace ONE, or any of those, which will eventually deploy the software to endpoints. Now, this is generally a process that we follow, but there could be some additional steps added in, or some steps dropped in, but this is generally a process. It also happens as a part of publish, you perform another round of testing, which is focused around UAT or functional testing. So this is generally the process. Now, when we get into the detail of each of the steps, we'll look at what could be certain things that you could look in each aspect of this packaging to see if you have enough enough data to automate that piece in this whole process. Next slide.
Yeah.
Right. So, like I said, the first piece is about really trying to identify which application you want to focus for deployment, or how do you start. And one thing, like I said, could be a request coming from your internal user or app owner, or there's a new version released, and you might have to go and look out for the vendor websites to see if there are new versions released, and then get yourself updated or your portfolio updated with this new version. Right? Any thoughts you want to add on that one, Mike or Yaron?
Yeah. You know, like any journey, right? It starts with knowing where we're going and what are we working with. So, you know, with this is, okay, I already likely have apps out there. So which ones have updates, and are they updates that, you know, close a vulnerability, or are they just feature updates, kind of nice to haves, or, you know, are they going to improve the work that my users, you know, so how important is the update? Is there an update? How important is it? How is it going to positively impact my environment? So kind of knowing that, what am I working off of? We did a previous roundtable about kind of different approaches of how do I look at my applications and which ones to go after first. So that's part of it. And, you know, kind of having the second bullet is the quote enterprise friendly. Sometimes, you know, the vendor only releases one version, but Chrome, there's some other ones out there that do have a, you know, MSI is usually easier to work with. So that's the preferable one to use, but it's not always the easiest to get to. So, you know, going around through some different prompts or finding the right one sometimes can be challenging. Once you kind of know where to go, it's usually easier, but there's that upfront. And then be able to do that on a regular basis. You know, you could go to the Chrome website, you could go to Adobe Reader and every week or check on it, or you could maybe set up a subscription for it, or there's other ways to keep a tab on it. But to know where to go, where to get the right one, be able to do that quickly would all tie into being able to automate this discovery step.
This is an interesting step, Mike, because in a couple of my conversations with our customers, what I've heard is, hey, the packaging team doesn't really worry about if there is a new version or not, because we rely on some other team to let us know, hey, there is a new version. Sometimes it is the procurement team or some other team where
app owner
or app owner, right, where they tell them, hey, this is the new version available, so please go ahead and create a package for this. So they say that this is a place where we don't really spend a lot of time. So how do I even consider myself spending time looking for new updates? But generally, let me know what you think, but I think that I don't think there are app owners assigned for some general, very commonly used enterprise applications like Chrome, Firefox, and look at the frequency of those applications, right? How frequently they get released. There is almost a new version in a month or less than that. Yeah. So how do you keep up with these versions? So in those cases, right, it is important that you might have to spend time trying to keep up with the new version.
Yeah, I think that's why without automation, this is a really onerous and you know, time intensive step, and thus your point, a lot of enterprises have said, you know, IT group, maybe we're in charge of the core applications, the 5, 10, whatever it is, apps. We can manage those, you know, like a Chrome comes out so often. Okay, we can handle those, but we can't handle the hundreds of other applications that finance or engineering, development, you know, sales, whomever use. So that's why we have app owners and put the onus on them to stay up to date. And some app owners are very diligent and can do that for you. And other ones, I just use the tool. I know how it works. So that's important. But they may not be staying up to date with and knowing what's the latest and greatest. So yeah, with automation, that's where you can take more of that onus back and put it in a central place so it can be managed. And then we can get that update percentage of staying up to date with the latest release, higher, because it's in that central and it's managed consistently across the board.
Right.
So, and we are a commercial software vendor, and we have our admin studio and our package feed module solution. So if you're looking to automate this step and you're looking for a solution that does that out of the box and you want to build and maintain it yourself, admin studio and its package feed module can offer that. So next one is I have is import, although depending on what solution you might be importing into something else, or kind of thinking in general, it's like gathering the data that you need. So now you know what applications have updates that are out there and kind of prioritize which ones to go after. So now how do I kind of go about doing that? Well, you need the installer package itself. Like you said, that enterprise friendly version, if one exists. Otherwise, it's whatever the vendor provides. And then from there, knowing the different command line options that are available, because if you want to install this on one or two machines, you just double click it and walk through it. But if you want to push it out to, dozens or hundreds or thousands of endpoints, you want to be able to automate that. So most folks will look at the installer and figure out what command line options are available to them and add those available. Detection method information, that's important, whether, especially if this is an update, I want to check for and see if the previous version is available and maybe only target those. If it may need a prerequisite, so only install if it's Java application, only install in the Java runtime environment exists, or it outputs the PDF, that's its main function, so only install if Adobe Reader is there, or whatever a PDF editor is there, or reader. So checking for that. For MSI based installations, knowing what you can customize through a transform file. So this is all this information, and you want to be able to gather it for every package quickly and easily, and then be able to do that, again and again for every new release. So if we're looking to automate this phase, we want to be able to have something that pulls all this information in.
And generally, this is the step where I see a lot of time getting spent. Right now, depending on how large your application portfolio is, just imagine going to each of those applications, each of those vendor websites, trying to figure out what's the download link and what are the command line options for silent installation. And deduction methods are quite challenging because you don't really know what, for example, it depends on what deduction method that you want to add. In MSI cases, it's generally pretty straightforward. You could add a product code because it's very unique for a product or version. So it's a lot easier. But let's say you have EXE, right? You might want to rely on the version, or you might want to rely on that primary file within that application, which gets installed in a particular location. So imagine the complexity that is involved in getting the deduction methods right. So you got the right devices targeted for deployment. And even the transform file, like you said, right? One is getting this whole data. And the second thing is doing it again and again for every new version, right? Transform files, though these are my customization, these are the properties that I set in the transform file, or these are some registry keys I add, all of these, but you have to still do it for each version. So one is the time that is required in getting all this together. And second is spending it over and over again and again on every version when there is an application version released by the vendor. So I see this. These are the kind of steps that you really want to look for automation. These are very good candidates for automation where there is a lot of repetition. And I don't generally, my experience has been the command line options that are made available by a vendor for, let's say, for a product don't really change a lot over the time. Right. They could add some additional customization, but I don't think so. Let's say for silent installation, if they had /yes in the next version, I don't think they change it to /quite, right? Yeah. So that the initial set of command lines that are released by the vendor are not going to change. They might keep introducing new, so it can enable their customers for more customization, but it generally changes. So these are really good candidates that if you have all the data in the right place, I think this is a good step for automation, and this will definitely save a lot of manual hours, right?
No. Yeah, like you said, there's
I mean,
that
again,
upfront research. Oh, go ahead, Karen. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry, I was just thinking about, how that would look from a practical standpoint, looking at my little history of how I did it in the old days. But, there's also a lot of documentation going on in the process. So if you look at, importing or having that, getting a request to package something means, there's an owner, et cetera, but there's a lot of documentation that you need to somehow write down or log or whatever to make sure that next time when you have another request for that same product, that you can just get the cookbook out, and do the magic again. So how does that resonate with you guys?
Yeah, knowing app owners, knowing other kind of internal data about the application, what you need to know, who's using it, maybe who, eventually when you're going to deploy it, where it needs to go to, plays into this.
License information, maybe.
License and information. For sure. Mm-hmm.
Maybe, and then of course, then the whole testing piece comes in there as well.
Yeah. Do we have the rights to push out the latest release? Is that our current contract include that, or, are we only held to, and how long can we, and conversely, how many older versions can we keep it out there? Some folks like to do an N-1 or N-2, which is fine. You don't necessarily need to go to jump and update every app every single time. But sometimes your licensing, your contracts only say, well, we only support the last couple or something like that. So that's something else you want to keep in mind, maybe more back to when to update. But yeah, what the internal information that you need around every application is going to impact how you prepare that app.
Yep.
And again, Admin Studio and the package feed module, we have all this information. We have this installer packages, command line option, this detected method information. As Kieran said, even if you know what you can create, what you can customize through a transform file, you have to create a new one every single release. So we make it easy to apply the settings that you want, and Admin Studio can go through and perform that transform creation using those. And as you said, unless every once in a while, maybe something will get added or new, but for the most part, a lot of that time, the customizations remain, from release to release. So unless you want to go back and update anything, you basically tell Admin Studio once what you want there, and it'll create the transform for every single release. So this is some upfront, testing of the application, kind of knowing what you're working with. So I've always told the customers and clients that we're talking to was, you're the expert in IT, you're the expert of your environment, what it looks like, what it needs, but you can't really be an expert of the hundreds or thousands of applications that you're bringing in. You didn't write it, you didn't create the installer for it. So how do I quickly evaluate it, figure out what it needs, any potential issues that may cause a problem if I try to deploy it as is, anything to be aware of. So having that information can, quickly and easily can speed up the process and further steps later down the road, or, help you troubleshoot when you're going out to deployment if you are having issues, what those could be involved with.
A good example that came to my mind on this one is dependency on Javas or dependency on frameworks, .NET frameworks, or in some cases we see that the .NET or the framework is also bundled into the application installer, right, into the setup. Now imagine without your knowledge on a device, the Java version gets updated because of this deployment, right? All the other applications will get impacted because of that update, because other applications had dependency on a certain version of Java. Similarly for .NET, or I become careful when there are dependencies. I become careful when there are prerequisites, and I become careful when there are really complex setups where there are multiple, like a suite, it has got multiple installers within, right? So I generally become very careful when I see these kind of applications. Again, like every application may not follow the same process. It
Mhm.
really depends. To your point, Mike, you made on the live slide. It really depends on the application, right? Every single step, how you look at that step really depends on how that application is built. What are your deployment requirements for that application? So there are a lot of aspects, but these are generally the applications which I become careful, and I would like to perform some kind of evaluation or testing, if you want to
Mhm.
call it. So I'm sure that it's not breaking any other applications.
No. I think this goes into an overarching, question of, can we automate this?
Mhm.
If every application used the same format, if every application had similar, customization options or whatever, then it would be really straightforward, right? But because of the nature of it, because every vendor does it just a little bit differently, they use a different installer technology. They added it. Just that's where the complexity and comes into. And with complexity, automation becomes more and more difficult unless you have something to supplement that. So it's very difficult to just take in vendor packages and just make it automated because of those differences there, right? And we hoped over the last couple decades with MSI out, we thought, okay, eventually every vendor by now will be on it. Some did, some moved, some did not, and what we've also seen a lot is folks going away from, okay, well, let's repackage everything that's not already an MSI into one. And that was a philosophy, especially when the thought was, well, I'll do it for now, and eventually that vendor will give me an MSI, and then I don't have to repackage it anymore. But some of those vendors said, nope, we're never moving. This is the way it is. But okay, we'll give you better documentation, right? We'll give you better information to
Correct. Yeah.
work with it, right?
Yeah, I think that is the point. How an application is built is going to be an important factor as on how do you want to package this application. And in many cases, you might not have that inside because that's very ISV information. I don't know if ISVs would expose and say, hey, this is how we built the EXEs. They might have had some scripts that are running independently within that installer. You don't really know what's happening inside that exe, so that makes it more complex. While you would love to see everybody releasing MSIs, but I don't think so. It's ever going to happen.
No.
And even within MSIs, custom actions add one extra level of complexity. Right now,
Right.
Sometimes custom actions are very focused on let's say on a device or a platform or where that custom action gets executed.
Mm-hmm.
You could write a custom action where say I want this to be executed only on a Windows 8 machine or only on a Windows 10 machine. So again, custom action also brings one additional level of complexity. So yeah, there's a lot within an application or a package that that would be interesting insights for you to take a decision. How do you want to automate that package?
Yeah. And while we have testing here at this part in the stage of it, I think having some upfront evaluation of the app, testing, as you know, is throughout. So you figure out, you look at what the vendors provided you, what you're starting off with, what you can't, because that's going to determine, different paths to prepare that application. And then you do something with it. Maybe it's just add a command line option, you're pretty much done, or maybe it's repackaging it or using a script around it. And then you're going to do some more testing. And then you're probably, once you deploy, you'll do even more testing. So we'll while testing is here, slotted here, it's throughout the process. So how can I quickly be able to evaluate what do I have? Where am I at? Is it going to likely work in my environment? So that's, having that information is good to have. And again,
that's a good point, Mike. This testing is also for you to figure out if you're interested in taking a different package format. For example, let's say you have a simple MSI, for example, and you want to test if another format could be suitable for this MSI. For example, MSIX. I don't want to talk about AppV because I think AppV might be going away in some time, but MSIX right now, even in those cases, I think this step for evaluation or testing will be really helpful. So you can check out of these many MSIs that I have, are there any candidates that I could consider for conversion to MSIX? Yes,
Yeah.
there are some benefits that MSIX brings in, but we also hear that from many of our customers that they are still really the testing phase, not. I haven't. Please let me know if you have had any conversations with anybody where they have started using it in the production. But I also see that it has come a long way from the time it has started about 4 or 5 years ago, from the time it started, and today where I see MSIX, it has come a long way. It is trying to address a lot of limitations that we saw earlier. So I think there is some progress happening, but we'll have to really wait and see when it becomes ready for enterprises.
Yeah. I think what I've heard from folks when it comes to MSIX is they've looked to adopt it more strategically in the sense of for certain use cases, right? If they're going to use it with Azure and Windows virtual machines, then you can do app attach and makes it really easy to provision, deprovision folks.
Right.
But, mass deployment, traditional methods replacing, previous methods, you could, depends on the app, right? And depends on what how it was architected. So that's why you want to be able to evaluate it up front.
Correct.
Yeah. I think we're still kind of waiting for more vendors. There's a couple, but more vendors to kind of start releasing their product from the get-go as an MSIX package. And that it probably would help speed up and snowball the effect. Yeah.
Oh, there are a couple of additional, I don't know if I can use the word overhead that MSIX brings with respect to deployment. For example, signing is a mandatory thing for MSIX to be deployed. Now, generally what I've seen that our package engineers are not, have not done signing so far because that was not a mandate. So that might be looked as an additional step or an overhead to sign MSIX. But at the same time, it because of all those factors, it brings one additional layer of security with respect to make sure the package is not tampered or not edited or during the transit, right, during the deployment. So there are definitely some benefits because of those security aspects. But again, like I said, we'll have to wait to your point, to see how more and more ISVs release their products as MSIX and to see how enterprises adopt MSIX.
And Admin Studio can help with this evaluation process and figure out what's needed to get you there too. So then it's kind of put it in overall, I kind of call it prepare, right? So a lot of people say I need to package this or repackage this, and it's kind of an overloaded word I see. So different people mean kind of different things. So to prepare an application, maybe repackage it. If you've got a tricky exe from a vendor that just does not work well by itself, doesn't have command line options, or always throwing up dialog boxes and modals and things. And so we have to repackage it. But in many cases, if we're hearing from customers, most folks are like, yeah, I'll repackage occasionally, but I prefer to work with the vendor installer. And if it's an exe, especially if it's got command line options, maybe that's all I need, or I need to do something else, before or after the install runs. And since you can't add it into the package, building a wrapper around on the outside to call those things and be able to do that is what they look at.
And this is next step after the gathering data, where I think is where the most time is spent. Again, so this is a good candidate if you could automate. I'm sure you're going to save a lot of hours. And again, you don't choose different formats for the new version of the same application, right? Like, for example, if you have decided that, hey, this is the app that I would want to repackage to MSI because the exe installer provided by the vendor doesn't have enough command line support or enough customization support, I don't think you would immediately change it when there is a new version available. So even here, I see a lot of repetition happening. Right?
Right.
You So you always wrap application A whenever there is a new version available, and you have got your set of customizations that you would like to add either as part of repackaging or later to the MSI, up to you or what process you follow. So I see a lot of repetition that's happening whenever there is a new version available. It could be with repackaging or wrapping using partial scripts or the app deploy toolkit or even the Y script if you're still using a good old method, right? So I think this is another good potential step which you should really look at for automation. I think this is going to save a lot of time because this is repetitive. It's not going to change, and it is consuming a lot of your time.
Exactly. Yeah. So the information you need to have the kind of that information up front. But to Kieran's point, App A is always an EXE, and once you decide wrapping is the best method, as you said, you're always going to wrap. App B is an MSI. As long as you know the customizations, you're going to always create the same. You're going to have to create a new transform, but it's going to basically be the same thing for every new version of App B, and so on and so forth. So exactly, where there's repetition, there's the ability to look to see, as long as we have the right details, the information we need, we can automate it. So, having those customizations, knowing how to slot those different, variables into a script if you need to, be able to, for converting, right, if you want to go to MSIX or some format, be able to spin up VMs and run through that process and make it as hands-off as possible. In different apps, you still might need to walk through them, but the whole process of before and after in that conversion process, if those can be automated, yeah, that's where we can speed that process up.
David Berman asked.
I'm sorry. Maybe that also depends on the on how you. So in the testing phase, I think you already determine also. Okay, is this an application that generates a lot of background noise, like zombie files or something like that? Leaving stuff behind after an uninstall has been done or an upgrade has been done. So you have to take that into account as well, right? To make sure, okay, if I go to do wrapping, what will happen then if I install and uninstall? Do I need to add all the residue files into that wrap script to clean up what's left? So maybe an MSI wouldn't be a bad choice, to wrap or to package. And the same thing for virtualization. So I'm just wondering, what do we see the most? Because I see a lot of people now going back to wrapping. At least there was a time where wrapping was very like a big thing. What is where is the market going to? Where is the enterprise going to?
What I think is, and you're right in everything that you said. You're right that what we are seeing is wrapping is becoming a more preferred method for creating the packages, and I think it is also slowly repackaging. I think now back in the day, or even today, right? Scripting is not expected to be one of the skill sets that a package engineer is expected to have, right? But with tools like App Deploy Toolkit, where they give you a ready-made script, like a template, which pretty much has everything, right? You made a good point about cleaning up the residue, right? They give you a uninstalled script. So after the installation, do you want to perform something? Like if you want to clean up some registries or some files or something, there is a script, there is a template. And as a part of installation, do you want to do some pre-checks like Mike mentioned already, right? Is there some prerequisites that you want to check, or you want to perform something as a pre-install configurations, post-install configurations? All of that could be accommodated into a single template. And the only thing that you're supposed to do here is really place your setup file, the path to your setup file. Those are like placeholders. You could literally have your, generally the customizations are standard across an organization, right? You do a certain set, like for example, I want to delete all the shortcuts from the desktop. I want to disable auto updates, for example, right? These generally don't change with each application and are generally very common across organization. So if you've got your template set once, then most often, without much changes, you could start using the same template for all your applications. And the only thing that you're expected to do is replace those placeholders where you change the command lines, where you change, let's say, the application name or version within the script. And that's how I'm seeing wrapping is considering many scenarios like pre-post configurations and a lot of it. And it has also made it a lot easier for our package engineers to create packages.
Yeah.
That has been my experience.
Yeah, I think the PowerShell app deploy toolkit took what was more, like you said, Kieran, not every packaging engineer is a VB scripter or command line or whatever. And they, the gents behind PowerShell app deploy toolkit, they are all packager engineers, deployment engineers. So they came out with a kind of a preset project with new command line options that are specifically around making it easier to deploy applications. So here's a great template. Now you just kind of plug in the right places, but then you still want to be able to quickly, that's great. That's even better, faster. You don't have to you can get up to speed a lot faster because you don't have to learn a lot as much from scratch. But is there even more, right? Is there, okay, for this app, I got to plug it here. This different app, it's slightly different. So there's even ability to automate further. And Admin Studio, we provide that. We could do that search and replace, and we support new custom information so that if we have it in Admin Studio before we wrap, we can easily translate that and move that into your script. So that scripting process went from hours before now to PowerShell app deploy toolkit, maybe an hour or half hour, and now we can take it down to seconds to get it ready. So
to go along with not repeating steps, David Berman asks, can't use the same transform for the new version?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's probably very similar, but it is keyed to that specific MSI version. So I create a transform file for version 7.1 comes out. It's a new MSI package. It's slightly different. It's got it's same product code, right? But different package code. And so the transform file, you can't just apply it. The transform is unique to a specific MSI. You could go in there, tweak a couple settings, and make it work for the new one. But most people just, when you're creating a new transform file, most tools say, give me the base MSI this is for. And so you have to provide the new version each and every time.
Isn't it so that you can create like a generic transform file that you can apply to any application? For example, by branding it, putting branding information, and every time when you have an MSI, it doesn't matter what product it is, you can just apply the branding MST to it.
There's kind of there's a method I know a while ago. You could take, in essence, a transform, remove some information. So it's not complete, but you could use that almost like as a template. But then you have to fill that information back in. And again, it's specific to that version of that app for that MSI. So there's ways to kind of do it, but it's not immediately, well, I already created it for version 7, so I can just immediately use it for 7.1. The Windows installer format just doesn't, that's not what a transform is specific for that version. So it's not a matter of just, I can use the exact same one again and again. So yeah, unfortunately, but with Admin Studio and knowing, like Kieran said, the underlying customizations you want to do often don't change. So with Admin Studio's approach to it is you tell it what customizations for this particular package you want, and it'll generate a new transform file specific for that one using those customizations you provided. So that way, in a way, you set it up once, and then Admin Studio can create those unique transforms each and every time.
I think Microsoft understood that challenge of having to create a new transform file for every new version. So in MSIX, they've addressed that problem. What transform files are for MSIX, for MSI files, are the modification files for MSIX. So the way the modification files are different from transforms is you create once, and you could apply that modification package for all the future versions of that application, if it's an MSIX, of course. So I think that's a good way of saving some time, unless there are some new customizations that you want to bring in or some new modifications that you want to bring into that MSIX. Then you go and make changes to your modification package. Otherwise, it's always going to be the same modification package that you could use.
Yeah, and that's the advantage of the MSIX format is, like you said, customize it, push out that customization out once, and then you don't have to. It can just stay out there unless you really need to edit it. And then every version can be affected by the same one. So that there, like you said, they thought about that and compared it to MSI and said, let's make it more modular and more
Right.
less overhead. So that's what MSIX I think brings to enterprises is in general less overhead of managing those apps, right? And if you want to take it away, you just take it away. And there, to your own point about how do you clean up stuff afterwards? Well, if it's all in the MSIX package and you've removed the package, it's gone. There is no remnants of it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
that's the power of having a containerized format like that.
Right.
So.
Like speaking on both the sides, right? But the limitation that I've seen with modification packages, it really, the level of modification that you can do, to what extent you can go, is really limited to the files and the registries. Like in MSI, you could set various properties, like there are various MSI properties, right? Public properties that you could set, which might result into some kind of customization that you're wanting to apply. So I think that is a powerful customization in MSI, which you could use while creating transforms. But in modification packages, it's mostly the registries and files.
Yeah, and that's why I think some vendors haven't yet supported MSIX is that they've relied on the installer to do certain things, or the MSIX is it really just drop the container and then the contents are in there, which is nice on one hand, but on the other hand, if you need to do stuff during install and all that, it's meant, then you have to almost rewrite your program, or at least parts of it, to support that. So where there's no longer a prompt you just install it. Do you want to install it? Yes. Boom, it's there. Then at first run, then the program sets up things and configures different areas. So I think that's probably why it's been slow going a bit, because depending on what your app needs, where you could rely on the installer to set it up, MSIX is like, no, I'm just, whatever container it is, I'm putting it on the machine, and then you take it from there.
Yeah.
Pluses and minuses. Okay, so next part, publishing. So now you've gone through it, you've found the application, you've prepared it, you've figured it all out, you've done some testing. Testing it's never always done, but there's most of the testing kind of, and you're ready to get it in that deployment system, whatever you use, whether it's Config Manager / CCM, Intune, VMware Workspace ONE, other systems like that. So it's getting the package itself there, but of course, all those different systems need other attributes, other pieces of information for it to know, to then decide, how to show it up and say if there's a kind of an app store or a user experience, what it looks like there. If it's going to install, how does, those command line options to install and uninstall, prerequisites, dependencies, requirements, all that type of information you have to put in that system for it to know, kind of what to do, right? So as I've said, there is all that information. So it's cool that the rules that you can set up in the deployment systems make it smarter. So it knows, I'm not going to just blast 1,000 machines with it and let the installer figure it out. I can be more strategic and say, it only meets the requirements on these 400 machines. So that's what I'm going to deploy to. And the other ones just, aren't applicable. But you need to give that information to the deployment system for it to know to make those type of decisions.
Especially in case of the configuration manager, I see it is not really a straightforward step to create applications, right? It's a really it's multiple step wizard. It takes you through, I think, more than 10. And
I've gone through it. I've okay, let's go to Config Manager, let's do a new application, walk through it. I've counted. It's between 12 and 15 different clicks. And that's for a pretty straightforward app. Yeah.
Right. And that will just get the package or the installer into configuration manager. And after that, you will have to set all those properties that you just mentioned, right, Mike? You want to make sure you want to set at least the deployment methods, because those are, the deduction methods, because those are the ones which are going to help you target the right devices or even requirements. Supersedence depends. If there is a need that you want to replace the previous any other application with this one, yes. But these two, I think, are very important. Deduction methods, requirements, other than, of course, the command lines. So getting the setup itself into configuration manager, and after that, adding all those properties on top of that. And third step is adding the deployment properties. When you deploy this, how do you want to deploy it? Do you want this application to be just installed without users' action? Or do you want to just make it available to the user so the user can take a decision if he wants to install it or not? Let's say in case of applications where there are licensing involved, or there is some approval process that is required, you might not want to right away go and install it, right? So you might want to just make it available in the company portal or system center on the endpoint, so the user can take a decision, click and install it from his app store. So these three steps, I think, makes it really complex thing to get an application into the configuration manager and get it ready for deployment. So again, another step where I see a lot of time is spent. If you could automate, I think this is another great place to save a lot of time.
Yeah. And then with Intune, right, if you want to be able to have, depending on the format you have and depending on what you want to do, you might have to first wrap it into an Intune Win wrapper package, and only then can you apply some of the rules that you used to be able to apply in Config Manager. So that's another step. And, there's tools out there to do it, but unless you're going to go through the scripting, you have to build that out. So how do you be able to do that and add that quickly? So there's another, aspect for preparation to get it ready for publishing and deployment.
And the utility that comes from Microsoft for generating the Intune Win apps, it doesn't have a user interface. So it's all command line. It's CLI. So it gets a little complex, right? When there is no user interface for you to look at what parameters you will have to pass to make sure you get the Intune Win in the right way.
Yeah. Upside, that it's easier. That's in a format to automate if you wanted to.
For automation, absolutely. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, from the initial get-go, and it can be challenging for some users to take that on. So yeah, that's another thing to know about. And of course, like everything else, Admin Studio, we have some ability to quickly help you gather this information, especially if it came from our package feed, but even other applications, we can pull that in. We can do that wrapping that Kieran just mentioned for Intune Win if you need to, and populate all the data. And the idea is set it up, configure it all in Admin Studio, so then when you do deploy it, that 12 to 15 clicks becomes like 3, just like which apps do you want, which system do you want, ready to go, click yes, and it'll all do that for you. And it'll do that for one app, or it'll do that for 50 apps or 100 apps, or however you want to deploy. So if you're looking to migrating and going to a new solution, or just be able to want to do more in less time, Admin Studio provides that automation there.
And migration is a great point you made, because I think that is where automation is going to be extremely beneficial. Now, and we are seeing a lot of our customers, not just customers, but generally what we are saying is organizations are either moving from configuration manager to Intune, or they are co-managing, right? So there is a lot of migration use cases that we are seeing these days where they are trying to take the applications within configuration manager, trying to migrate them to Intune Win. So during this process, I think automation is again going to help you a lot to make your migration process easier. I'd not say easier, but at least less time consuming. And and if you have command line supports, or if you have some, that was a great point that you made, that with respect to conversion to Intune Win, if you have tools like those where it supports command lines, I think those are really great, where you could just write one script and the script will take care of getting the packages, converting them, getting the packages from configuration manager, converting them, and then moving them over to Intune Wind, right? So yeah, on a sideline, that is the whole idea of Admin Studio's PowerShell commandlets and REST APIs that we have today. So you could just write your own script, use those commandlets, the PowerShell commandlets or REST APIs, and you could build your own automation scripts that does everything that Admin Studio can do.
All right, one final topic, and we'll get to some Q&A. And as we said, right, the testing never ends. So, right, there's whatever you want to call it, user acceptance testing or UAT, smoke testing, functional testing, right? There's some aspects to that too.
So generally, the package engineers, this will be an interesting step, I feel, as to how do you look at it from an automation point of view, right? Because installation, uninstallation seems to be pretty straightforward because you have command lines with you, and you could really automate them using the command lines for installation and uninstallation. But the question on how do you automate testing of launching of an application, or how do you automate, let's say, some basic functionality testing, and also to keep in mind, the packager may not know what to test, right? Like he's deploying, let's say, CAD or some engineering apps. He would not know what to test there. So the challenge that I see with UAT testing or functional testing is how do you test launching? How do you know if you automate? How do you know if the launch was successful? I see some challenges here, but the first point seems to be a pretty straightforward. And even if that could be achieved to make sure your deployments are good, I think you could rely on, let's say, your app owner or your first level of deployment rings, which are generally the pilot deployments. Maybe you could rely on them for some functional testing or some basic launching testing and all, so you can get off some work from your plate.
Yeah, that's what I see more in folks like, let's just get it. I think it's good on our end from what we can tell. Let's deploy it out so we test the deployment of it. Does it go through our standard deployment system? We'll target a few test machines. We'll let the app owners come in, verify it. That they not only know how to launch it, but they know where to click, what features to run, make sure everything's worked. Maybe as a client app and has to log into a separate server that they only have accounts for, right? So they can test all that, make sure it's all good. And then if it passes all that, then it's ready for a wider release. Yeah, so as you said, things like shortcuts to know how to launch the applications, the steps that you need to be involved, not only to launch and test the application, but if it fails, detect that, right? Is it an error message that pops up, or is it just something doesn't load that you expected it would? There's different actions and that you can expect for and look for to verify.
Yeah, the failure of launching could be tricky. I don't know if all the applications, if you're following best practices, if your launch fails, you might want to return a written code, which is good.
Yeah, you got return code, the logging that's generated through the installer. Yeah.
So it makes it a lot easier to automate those applications where you could validate the success. But let's say it just crashes on you or throw some error on you, and you have written a script and your script is not able to capture it. So some challenges that we see in functional testing. So, and I'm happy to say we are working on functionality in a new capability in Admin Studio to see how we can help our customers, our users, automate this functional testing. So maybe we'll come back with more details either in the community or maybe in one of these roundtables.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, so we can spin up VMs and launch installers with command line options.
Today, yes,
to that
absolutely.
far, but you're saying we can take. Well, we're looking at even being able to do more beyond that.
Yeah. Again, because we understand this is one step which is heavily manual today.
Right.
And if this one piece could be automated, then each step that we discussed all through has a good potential for automation. So that way you'll be able to automate the entire end-to-end application packaging process. Again, I want to be careful when I say this end-to-end because, like we discussed all through this, it really depends on the application.
Right.
For some applications, you may not be able to automate even a single step, but for some applications, you might be able to automate all your steps. And anything that you achieve with respect to automation is going to save a lot of time, so you can focus on much important and much more critical work, right?
It's like the 80-20 rule. If we can automate 80% of the apps fairly easily and from end to end, now you've saved a lot of time, and now you just have to work on the last 20. So, All right, with the time remaining, let's go to some Q&A. So, Sunny, you got some good questions for us?
Yeah, I think a good one. I remember Kieran saying earlier that research and preparing the application are probably the two most time spent areas in terms of automation. And to go along with research, Divya Prakash asked, how can Admin Studio help us with software governance, particularly around reviewing applications against company standards?
So it really depends on what standards you follow, but in Admin Studio, we have got a set of static rules that you could test your application against. For example, Admin Studio can tell if your package that you're trying to deploy is meeting all the best practices that are meant for MSI. So you could really test if it is meeting all best practices, because this is going to help you with reliable deployment. And other aspect that we spoke about is with respect to dependency. Admin Studio can tell you if your application has got dependency on any version of Java, and we also go to a level of telling you which version of Java. And also Admin Studio can analyze the package and let you know if there is Java package inbuilt into your installer and what version of Java it is. So these are some things that you could use in Admin Studio to achieve those standards. Mike, you want to add something?
Yeah, and I just changed it to someone wanted to see the process slide again, kind of refresh themselves. Yeah, exactly right. There's some out of the box Windows installer best practices, industry standards, and you can choose which ones you want to follow and which ones you don't. It's not an all or nothing. And there is the ability, right, to create custom rules. It probably needs some assistance from Flexera to kind of do that. But common example I see is like, I don't want any shortcuts on the desktop. Right? That doesn't violate any best practices, and plenty of apps do that. But if I'm deploying, 50 apps to a new endpoint, I probably don't want 35 of them to all put their own shortcut on the desktop. It just looks messy. So you could create a rule to just look for that and say, yeah, no, you can you can add the shortcuts in the start menu, but let's not put it on the desktop. So there's the ability to extend that further and create your own rules too. Yeah, good. Other questions?
I think those were the main ones. A lot of them were answered. I think there's a lot of follow-up ones, but I think you could go towards the community slide, Mike.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Yeah. Well, if we didn't get to your question at this point, we'll go ahead and compile the rest and make a post in our community soon. That's a good plug for it. So if you haven't checked it out already, we do have our community. It's flexera.com/community, and we have an Admin Studio section. So that's where you can go for knowledge base articles and documentation. When we have new releases, we have a release blog. We just have interesting topics and things we want to post, and answers to past webinars are here. And there's also an active forum. So if you have a question that you can search for it and see if, in many cases, it's already been asked and answered. If not, you can go ahead and answer that too. So we have a blog, as mentioned. We have a learning center with different videos. So if you want to learn more about how to do certain things in Admin Studio, saw a question about how to repackage an EXE into an MSI. There's a video on that. How to create a transform file. There's a video on that. How to create an MSIX package, video on that. So you can check that out. All links to the different videos, documentation, links to videos we have on YouTube. We have previous sessions where we've spoken at conferences and recorded that and make that available. So if you haven't been to community, a lot of cool information. Check it out. Yeah. And then, we're always interested in feedback and where we can hear new topics. So if you have any topics we haven't covered, we have all the archived versions of all the previous roundtables we've gone through. You can watch those at any time, but there is a topic we haven't covered or maybe haven't covered in a while, we could resurface it. We can feel free to go. It's a long URL, but or just Google check or go to our community and search for topic
Yeah,
roundtable topics.
roundtables. Right. Mhm. Excellent.
All right. Well, thanks for joining this time, and we plan to have another one in a couple of months. So look out for a new date in November. But appreciate everyone's time today and lots of good questions, and hopefully it was helpful for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.